when the news hit that they were cancelling the mighty WR250R. For me personally, I was absolutely gutted. This was my very first dual sport. I have so many great fond memories of that motorcycle, and I know plenty of people out there did. Even the people that didn't own one, they still loved them and respected them for being a classic, versatile and capable little dual sport. What happened? Why did it go away? Why did Yamaha discontinue it? What made it so good in the first place? And what does it need to be brought back to life? And lastly, what are the chances of that actually happening? Let's get into it. The WR250R is one of those bikes that we were all just shocked that it made it to the showroom floor. I don't know what happened at Yamaha, but clearly the marketing team had no knowledge about what was going on, and the technicians and the true lovers of motorcycles somehow won the day and got this amazing little bike onto the showroom floor. So what they did was they looked at the Yamaha R1 and thought, you know what, let's take one cylinder off this highly technical super sport absolute beast mode of a motorcycle and throw it in a modified YZ dirt bike frame and just see what happens. And Yamaha were like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. As a previous owner, I feel like I understand this motorcycle intimately. I think I'm going to start out with the number one being how versatile it was. Now, this is a trait of most dual sports. Everyone loves a dual sport because they are so versatile. They're a true 50-50 motorcycle. But within the 250 class, there was no bike more capable, more versatile than the WR250R. In fact, it was so capable that it was one of those rare cases where a small little dual sport gained the respect of the whole dual sport and adventure bike community as a tough, capable, go anywhere little dual sport. So versatility really showed up for me when I was riding, because I could take that WR250R and hang with my mates on enduro bikes like the KTM EXEs, go and goat trails, single track, pretty technical stuff. Although I was a lot slower and it was harder going with that extra weight, there was nothing I could put in front of that WR250R that it couldn't do. In fact, it was limited by me, the rider. It was not limited in itself. And then the next weekend, I could turn around, throw my bags on, fill up that huge tank to the brim, and head out into the sunset for a multi-day trip with my mates on their big adventure bikes, and it would do that just as easily. So it really could cover the whole spectrum of riding in the dual sport world, all out of that tiny little 250cc motor. Is probably the major reason why it was such a popular bike, was it was capable of doing anything with the right modifications. The second was the equipment that this thing came with. You've got to remember that most little 250 dual sports are built to a brutal price. There's no extra expense really given to a small displacement dual sport because they've got to be super affordable. That means cutting costs on the production ends, but not the case here with the WR250R. A quarter of a Yamaha R1 engine with titanium valves and all the technology that comes with that. A lightweight and super strong frame that's based off the YZ dirt bike series. And the most surprising thing of all was that competent suspension with decent adjustability. That's something you don't see in the small displacement dual sport world, or generally in the dual sport market at all. The next thing that made this bike so great was the power it put out. And so this little 250 managed to pump out 29 horsepower, which if you rev the tits off the little thing, was an absolute blast to ride. Now, sure, those aren't huge numbers, but it was enough to get the job done for most people. It was a really fun and engaging bike to ride both on and off-road, and a lot of that came down to that characterful little 250cc motor. The next really great feature is something that I think a lot of people overlook when they're getting a motorcycle, and that's whether a bike can grow with you as your skills get better. Some bikes are really good for a time point. If you're a learner getting a particular bike, it can be fantastic. But once your skills get better and better, can that bike keep up with your new skill set? So I think one of the low-key great things about the WR250R was that it was a 250 that could grow with the rider. The next one can make or break a dual sport or adventure bike or an enduro bike or any motorcycle at all. And that's the accessory market coming behind the motorcycle. If you don't have the accessory market coming on board and really being able to help the owners turn the bike into whatever they want to take it to that next level of versatility, particularly in the dual sport world, that can be the end of the motorcycle as a cult classic. The third-party accessory market really came behind this bike, and it really opened up a whole new level of riding. You could put a huge big IMS tank on this thing, a screen, throw the best suspension on it, a whole pile of stuff, rear racks, shiny crap bolted to this bike to turn it into an absolute lightweight adventure weapon, which is exactly what I did, and it was fantastic. So I think without that secondhand market, this bike wouldn't have been as great as it was. And the last one is what every great dual sport needs, and that's durability and reliability. The WR250R had fantastic service rate intervals, but more importantly, no matter what you threw at it, how much you abused the bike, it just kept going. As long as you do the basic maintenance on these bikes, they'll go for damn near ever, which is the hallmark of a fantastic dual sport. If it was so great, why isn't it still on the showroom floor? The two big ones is the same for every bike that is falling off the perch at the moment or into the future. And that was the lack of ABS. A lot of countries now, Australia included, unless you're an enduro or dedicated off-road motorcycle, you have to have ABS on your motorcycle. And the second was the emission standards. Despite it being a relatively recent 250 EFI motorcycle, emission standards were getting stricter and stricter. This was already a motorcycle that wasn't being built to a very cheap price. So perhaps Yamaha thought that they were already investing too much into this little dual sport as it was, and maybe they were getting cold feet, and they decided with having to add ABS and having to make the motor run clean enough to pass the new Euro emission standards at the time, it just wasn't worth it. And the fourth one on the list that really didn't help the WR250R was that the 250 class was moving away from the 250 sized motor because of emission standards anyway. Honda were in the works of updating the CRF 250L to a 286cc motor, and Kawasaki were in the process of updating the KLX 250 to a 300. Yamaha were faced with having to update the motor to a larger capacity as well, and maybe they weren't as prepared for it as Kawasaki and Honda were, because Kawasaki, the 250S, that was actually a 300cc motor to start with, as with the CRF as well. Honda already had that 300cc motor in the CB series, so it wasn't as big a task to put the 286cc motor in the new CRF, whereas Yamaha really would have had to put a bit of R&D into getting the 250 to be a bigger displacement, to pass emission standards and to still be competitive with the other two. They would need to update is the engine capacity. In my opinion, this is the easiest route for them to pass the emission standards, because it means they'll be able to increase the performance to an amount that would allow them to still at least meet the power of the old 250 whilst passing the emission standards and being able to choke up the engine to a greater extent. Now, the size of the motor, I'd be leaning more towards the smaller capacity, because going too big with your bore is going to limit the durability of the motor, in my opinion. I would like to see it somewhere in the 300cc mark, a smidge over, maybe something like the Athena kit that you can already get off the accessory market. I think that would be a great move. Of course, I think a bit of a refresh to the looks would be really nice, but not needed. The WR250R looked sharp enough, but I would address that headlight to a brighter LED, as the stock one was pretty piss poor. It really wasn't that great at night. I think keeping this bike as a premium dual sport is also a great idea. It would be a real shame if Yamaha were to come out with a completely new version of the WR250R, but it was built to far more of a budget price and a budget feel. You really were riding a high quality 250 dual sport, which was an anomaly in the market at that time. So I think that's the route they should continue to go. Now, what about the suspension? Well, I think the front was pretty good. The rear, the only problem I had with it is the questionable rebound, and it only ever reared its head when you were really pushing it hard off-road. It would sometimes try and kick you back out of the seat. They could even just tweak the existing suspension on the WR250R. Putting updated, even fancier suspension would be a great thing, but that would probably drive up the cost. But to save that, they could probably just sift through the parts bin of all their WRF series motorcycles and maybe soften it up a bit for the dual sport application. Can they bring that quality in at a price that's still reasonable to the buyer? Of course, it's going to be more expensive than the competition, but the question would be how much more expensive in this world where inflation is going rampant. But let's be real here. We've talked about how great it was. We've talked about why it was discontinued. but is there any likelihood that we'll ever see a little dual sport from Yamaha again? The first is Yamaha could take a look around at the small displacement market. Honda recently completely redid the CRF 250L, and now we have the CRF 300L in 2021. Likewise with Kawasaki's long-standing KLX 250S now being the KLX 300. So Yamaha could be looking and seeing all these changes and seeing how well the 300L, the 300 Rally and the KLX 300 are doing, and think to themselves, you know what, we need to get back in this game. We have the 250R already. Maybe we can just extend the capacity to roughly 300 cc's like the Athena kit and re-release it onto the market with a nip tuck and really capitalize on the enthusiasm that's currently going on in the small displacement renaissance. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Yamaha could be thinking that way. Yamaha might think that's too much effort to put into one little dual sport that isn't going to sell in the numbers of their road bikes or their adventure bikes. What they could do, and what I think is also fairly likely, is them basically taking a leaf out of the playbook that they've had lots of success for. One of the ways they've been able to maintain profit margins in the modern era with everything getting so expensive is with the modular platform, producing lots of bikes out of one engine on one chassis platform, being able to swap in and out parts for different kinds of motorcycles. Yamaha could look at the small displacement market, see how well Honda is doing with their modular platform, and think to themselves, that's probably the way I want to do it. That maximizes my profit. It means I get as many bikes as I can think about out of the one platform, rather than specializing in one small little segment of the market. We might even see them skip the dual sport phase and do something more like the 300 Rally, where it's more of an adventure bike than a true bare bones dual sport. But I'd still be happy in that scenario as well, because I think Yamaha are sorely lacking in the small displacement off-road category at the moment. The third outcome is always an outcome that we have to contend with, and that's the fact that Yamaha might not ever bother to do it again. Maybe there wasn't enough money in it. Maybe they've decided it's not worth the cost of producing the bike for a small market. Maybe they're just too happy making money in other areas of motorcycle riding. Whatever the case, there is always the possibility that Yamaha just do not care. And that's certainly a decent possibility, considering it's been 4 years since we saw the last dedicated small displacement off-road motorcycle from Yamaha. If I was a betting man, I would say that Yamaha probably cannot resist the idea of a modular small displacement platform, much like Honda has had large success with. But I'd love to know your thoughts. Would you like to see a new WR250R? What kind of specifications do you think it needs or that you want? Would you like to see it just as a WR250R, or built off a modular platform out of Honda's playbook? Or do you think we're never seeing a WR250R successor or any small displacement dual sport / adventure bike from Yamaha in the future? And as always, don't forget to stay shiny side up.